My grandparents gave me a trip for my 18th birthday, but my parents made me give it to their favorite daughter because they thought it would be wasted on me. Hi, I'm an 18-year-old girl. Recently, my paternal grandparents gave me an international trip to Rome as a birthday gift, along with a check to cover my expenses. They handed me an envelope with the plane tickets inside. The day after my birthday, my parents began pressuring me to give the trip to my older sister, June. She's 21 and is the golden child of the family, in case you hadn't guessed. My parents argued that June is studying architecture, so a trip to Rome would be a perfect opportunity for her to see famous designs and improve her understanding during her vacation. I tried to explain that I was planning to specialize in literature, so visiting Rome was equally significant for me. June had her chance when she turned 18, but turned down a similar trip my grandparents offered her back then, asking for the money instead. Now it was my turn, and I wasn't willing to give it up. Besides, the airline we were flying with doesn't allow tickets to be transferred unless it's under serious circumstances. My parents brushed that off, saying I just needed to hand over the ticket and they'd figure it out. This argument dragged on for days after my birthday. It's been 2 weeks now, and eventually I gave in. I told them they could do whatever they wanted, not because I wanted to give up the trip, but because I was tired of the endless fights. I knew they wouldn't stop until I gave in. They even started emotionally blackmailing me, listing all the things they'd done for me and saying they were only asking for a small favor in return. I thought it was incredibly unfair. At first, I fought back, but a few days ago, they said something hurtful. They mentioned that they didn't want the trip to go to waste. When I heard that, it stung. They tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. It was clear they believed that the trip would be wasted on me but meaningful for June. They argued that because June had already graduated, the trip would look great on her resume, while I supposedly had plenty of time to take trips like this in the future. So, I caved. I let them take the ticket. I didn't want the constant arguments anymore. At least I still had the check. I've been used to this kind of treatment since I was a kid, so I wasn't surprised. However, I didn't think they'd manage to transfer the ticket, as the airline's policies didn't allow it, but I guess they found a way around it. Yesterday, when I was supposed to go to the airport, Jun took my boarding pass and headed there instead. Later, we got a call from the police saying Jun had been in an accident. Apparently, on the way to the airport, she tried to grab the taxi driver's wheel because she thought he was taking the wrong route and was worried about being late. Her reckless move caused them to lose control of the car and crash into a tree. Jun came out relatively unscathed, with only a few scratches, but the taxi driver was severely injured. The side of the car where he sat took the brunt of the impact. He ended up with a broken arm and a deep gash on his forehead that required numerous stitches. Now, he's pressing charges against June for causing the accident. Because of this, my parents are being forced to dip into their life savings to negotiate a settlement with the driver and avoid a court trial. When I found out about this, I couldn't hold back my feelings. Without thinking, I blurted out that this was karma for them forcing me to give up my ticket and trip to Rome. This all happened yesterday. My parents had just explained the situation to me and were about to leave to see Jun. The moment I said those words, I regretted it. They looked shocked and told me it wasn't something to joke about. I tried to take it back, but they said once the words were spoken, the damage was done. They accused me of being selfish for saying something like that about my sister's accident. That enraged me. It felt so hypocritical for them to call me selfish when they were the ones who made me give up my trip in the first place, claiming it would have been a waste if I had gone. I pointed this out, but they refused to engage with me after my earlier comment. They left for the hospital to check on Jun. Still fuming, I impulsively decided to follow them. I grabbed a taxi and headed to the hospital. On the way, a sudden thought hit me. Why was I sacrificing my happiness when my family clearly didn't value me? They never appreciated me no matter what I did. So why not just live my life the way I wanted? If they were going to hate me anyway, I might as well make it worth it. I quickly packed some essentials and a few clothes, then took the taxi to the hospital. By the time I arrived, my parents and I reached the floor where the taxi driver was being treated almost simultaneously. Jun was still talking to the police, trying to convince them the accident wasn't her fault, even though it obviously was. I wasn't there for her. I walked straight up to her and asked if she still had the boarding pass. She looked confused and disoriented, so I reached into her bag myself and rummaged through it. When I found the pass, I grabbed it and ran out, leaving everyone stunned. I jumped back into the taxi and headed straight to the airport. Luckily, I made it just in time to board my flight. I didn't check my phone for calls or messages until I landed in Rome. As expected, my family was furious. My parents think I was incredibly insensitive, given that June had just caused a serious accident. But they seem to overlook the fact that she caused it. All they care about is that I prioritized my trip over her accident. Jun, on the other hand, is angry because she thinks I stole this opportunity from her, even though she was the one who stole it from me first. All I did was reclaim what was rightfully mine. I admit I shouldn't have given up the ticket in the first place. Still, the general consensus is that what I did was wrong, and now I feel like I should apologize, but I'm not sure if I really should. Jun also sent me a message saying our parents will have to rely on their savings to settle with the taxi driver. I know our family's financial situation isn't great, and I feel a bit guilty about the money I spent on this trip. I could have saved it and given my parents the birthday check they gave me for other expenses, but I chose to be selfish. Does this make me the villain for going to Rome after my sister's accident? Addressing the questions. Many people have asked questions, and I'll clarify the situation to make it easier for everyone to understand. 1. What about the boarding pass? Honestly, I don't think my parents or Jun had a concrete plan to work around the rules regarding ticket transfers. I believe their plan was to just show up at the airport and wing it somehow. If they had managed to figure something out, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport since they would have been waiting for June. So, I'm pretty sure they didn't have any plan at all. Lucky for me, I guess. 2. Why did I keep living with my family despite their treatment? Why didn't I just move in with my grandparents or someone else? Well, you have to understand this is the kind of treatment I've been used to since childhood. I'm not saying it was right, but my parents' favoritism toward my sister made me feel like I had to earn their love instead of realizing they should have treated me better from the start. It sounds strange, but for 18 years, I tried to be the best daughter to gain their approval. This led to a lot of heartbreak, disappointment, and frustration, but I never wanted to give up on them. I foolishly believed they would change because they were my parents, and that's just how a child's mind works. As for moving in with my grandparents, they live far from the city and everything I've ever known. Although I thought about it many times, I didn't want to completely change my lifestyle. Plus, my grandparents don't know how my parents treat me. Honestly, I don't think anyone in my family does because we're pretty good at hiding it when others are around. Now, as an adult, I no longer feel the need to please anyone. I've come to terms with the fact that leaving them behind might be the best choice. 3. My relationship with Junjun and I have never been particularly close. We don't hate each other, we just don't get along, and that's it. 4. My family's financial situation. We're not wealthy. In fact, we're on the lower end of the spectrum. My mom is a homemaker, and my dad is a high school football coach. They often rely on my grandparents for money. I don't know how they're going to handle this situation because if they need money from my grandparents, they'll have to admit what they did. That's their problem now. Other details. Some of you asked about Jun sitting in the passenger seat of the taxi. Honestly, I don't have a specific answer for that. It's just a habit. Even on road trips, she always took the passenger seat. That's her spot, I guess. I do think it's partly because she likes to be in control. She literally grabbed the steering wheel because she thought the taxi driver wouldn't know the best route to the airport and would get stuck in traffic. That's what caused the accident. So you can imagine how much she needs to be in charge. She even left for the airport 5 hours before the flight. Everything has to go her way. Update 1. I've thought about this for a few days and decided to relax and enjoy my trip. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, especially since I won't have much free time after starting university. I don't need to worry about my parents or what's happening at home. They're adults and can handle their own issues. Besides, it's not my fault they tried to claim something that wasn't theirs, only to face karma in the end. You're right. It was silly of me to expect gratitude for my sacrifices. My parents would always find a way to resent my happiness. Right now, I'm having the best time in Rome. This morning, I finally opened up about everything to my grandparents, something I've never done before. Not even my friends knew about the mistreatment I endured from my parents, or how they always favored my sister. Talking about it felt liberating. Many of you suggested I share my feelings, so I chose to tell my grandparents. They were shocked to hear that I had been dealing with this for so long and had never spoken up. I explained how I believed staying silent and being a good daughter would eventually make my parents appreciate me. But now, it's painfully clear that would never happen. My grandparents assured me I did the right thing. They told me that once I returned from Rome, I should come directly to their house. They planned to move me out of my parents' house and have me live with them. When I mentioned needing to leave for university in the fall, they said I didn't need to worry about it. They offered to cover all my expenses. One conversation with my grandparents changed everything. For the first time, I don't have to worry about where I'll live or how I'll pay for school. Within a week, I'll return home to a much better situation. Update 2. My trip ended a few days ago, and now I'm living with my grandparents. As instructed, I went straight to their house upon arriving. I was surprised to see they had already prepared the guest room for me, and all my belongings from my parents' house had been moved here. When I arrived, my grandparents welcomed me warmly. They explained that after our conversation, where I told them everything, they confronted my parents. They already had a meeting planned because my parents had called them the evening of June's accident to discuss what to do and how to proceed. My parents didn't want to use their savings for the settlement and were desperate to avoid the case going to court because June would be in serious trouble. There were taxi camera recordings proving she caused the accident. A settlement was their only option, but the taxi driver was demanding an incredibly high amount, so they needed my grandparents' help. During the meeting, my grandparents brought up how I had been treated and asked my parents if it was true they'd mistreated me my entire life, and even asked me to give up my trip so Jun could go instead. At first, my parents tried to avoid the question, saying they were there to discuss June's situation, not me, and claimed that talking about it was unnecessary since I was in Rome enjoying my life. But my grandparents insisted, wanting answers. Eventually, my parents broke down and admitted it was true. However, they justified their behavior by saying I deserved that treatment for abandoning my family during a difficult time. They accused me of showing up at the hospital only to grab my plane ticket and make it to my trip on time, completely ignoring what was happening with Jun and them. They claimed I had always been envious of June because she was better than me at everything and that I couldn't stand it. They insisted it wasn't their fault and denied ever treating me unfairly, a blatant lie. My parents said I was just spoiled and pampered, and they weren't going to tolerate it anymore when I returned. That was all my grandparents needed to hear to cut ties with their only son. My grandparents and parents argued, and my parents told them they were free to leave, claiming they didn't need their help because they were enabling my selfish behavior. They even said they didn't want me back, and if my grandparents wanted to take me in, they were welcome to do so. After that, my grandparents arranged for movers to pack up my belongings and bring them to their house so I'd be comfortable. When they told me what had happened, I broke down in tears. It hurt deeply. I had always known my parents didn't care about me, but they were all I had known for the past 18 years. My heart was shattered. I wouldn't wish this pain on anyone. But despite everything, my grandparents stood by me, and I'm incredibly grateful for their support. Now, I'm not confused anymore. I'll live with them, and this is my home now. I'll be going to college in a couple of months, but until then, my grandparents have promised to be there for me. Even when I leave for college, they assured me they'd cover all my expenses, so I have nothing to worry about. I haven't contacted my parents or Jun since my return. I hadn't even checked the messages they sent because I was trying to enjoy my trip. Today I finally read them, thinking I was in a better place mentally. I'm so glad I didn't check earlier because it would have triggered another breakdown. Jun's messages were along the same lines, calling me selfish, spoiled, and pampered. She said she was glad she wouldn't have to deal with me anymore because I didn't deserve her company. Honestly, I think she's got it backward. She doesn't deserve mine. but I don't care anymore. My parents' messages hurt more. They accused me of being heartless and said they should have stopped me when I showed up at the hospital. They blamed themselves for failing to raise me properly because I ran off on a trip while they were dealing with a family crisis. In another message, they accused me of complaining to my grandparents about how they treated me, despite doing everything to give me a comfortable life. They don't understand that having a comfortable life isn't the same as having a good childhood. They listed all the things they provided: education, food, clothes, and a roof over my head, and said there was nothing more I could have asked for. They said my jealousy of Jun didn't justify painting them as villains. They even said they were right to call me a waste because I'd wasted their time and energy for years. Now they were happy to be rid of me. Those words hit hard, and I almost cried. But after talking to my grandparents, I promised myself I wouldn't let their words hurt me anymore because they're not worth it. So, I didn't cry. I blocked my parents so they couldn't contact me again. Now I'm focusing on healing and moving forward. After all the trauma they've caused, I need to let go and erase them from my mind to live my best life. I'm not sure if that's possible, but it's worth trying. So, I didn't cry. Instead, I blocked my parents so they could no longer contact me. I'm determined to begin my healing process and move forward. After all the trauma they've caused me, I need to leave them behind completely to live my best life. I'm not sure if that's entirely possible, but it's worth trying. Update 3. Something really crazy happened today. It's been almost 2 weeks since I got back from my trip, and I hadn't heard anything about my parents or Jun. From what I gather, they're still struggling to gather money for a settlement with the taxi driver. This afternoon, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house in a vengeful mood. When I opened the door, they didn't even acknowledge my existence and went straight to the living room to sit with my grandparents. I didn't know what to do, so I hovered nearby. My grandparents told me to sit with them. They knew my parents wouldn't be happy about including me in the conversation, and I could see it in their faces. Still, they didn't say anything. Once we were all seated, my grandparents asked why they were there. The last time they'd spoken, my parents had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with them because they supported me. My parents said they still felt that way, but had some unfinished business to settle. Then, they pulled out a document filled with calculations and claimed they'd spent a significant amount of money raising me. Now that my grandparents had taken over responsibility for me, they expected them to reimburse all the money they'd spent on me so far. The amount? Almost $10,000. I was shocked at how low they had stooped. I had no words and could only stare at them. It was clearly a ploy to guilt us, but it was utterly ridiculous. My grandparents asked for a moment to discuss privately. While they stepped away, the room was awkwardly silent with just my parents and me. They completely ignored me, not even glancing in my direction. I felt incredibly uncomfortable. Thankfully, after a few minutes, my grandparents returned and took their seats. My grandfather, calm and polite as ever, said they would gladly pay the amount my parents claimed they'd spent on me, but on one condition. They had to return all the money they had borrowed from my grandparents over the years. The expression on my parents' faces was priceless. They were completely caught off guard, like deer in headlights. I had to leave the room because I was holding back laughter. I stayed in my room until my parents left. Later, I asked my grandparents what had happened after I left. They told me my parents tried to argue their way out of it, but ultimately had no choice but to back down. They ended up leaving, furious and cursing. My grandparents assured me that even if my parents tried to come back, they wouldn't be a problem. They were more than capable of handling them. Update 4. A lot has happened since my last update. I'm now in college and things are going well. It's challenging, as expected, but it's a good kind of challenge. Back then, I was struggling for my parents' affection. Now my biggest concern is preparing for exams. Life is much better. As for my parents, when my grandparents said they had to pay back the borrowed money, they weren't joking. According to my grandfather, the total is about $87,000. Compared to that, the $10,000 my parents demanded for me seems absurd. They still owe my grandparents $7,000, and while my grandfather isn't planning to take them to court, He's too busy enjoying fishing and golf. He made it clear he'll remind them every chance he gets. Meanwhile, my parents are dealing with the taxi driver's lawsuit. The settlement amount is around $90,000, which means they're drowning in over $100,000 in debt. Since they've always relied on my grandparents for financial support and can no longer do so, they're in a bind. Even as a literature student, I can't help but see the poetic justice in this. On top of everything, my parents recently had to remortgage their house to pay off part of the settlement. The interest rate is terrible because their credit score isn't great. They've also told June, who now works at an architecture firm, to cover the payments. But her salary isn't high, so she's stuck living with them. My grandfather has also given my father an ultimatum: repay what's owed, or he won't be included in the will. My grandfather doesn't care much about money, but enjoys seeing my father squirm. He even told my dad to hurry up because, in his words, I'm not getting any younger. I haven't had any contact with my parents or Jun in all this time, probably because they're blocked, or maybe because they haven't tried. Either way, I prefer it this way.